You can walk every single morning, feel completely steady on your feet, pass every basic coordination test your doctor has ever thought to give you, and your body's internal navigation system is still quietly going offline. Not in 5 years, not gradually in some abstract sense. Right now, as you are reading this, sensors that your balance depends on are degrading at a rate that no symptom will announce. The first indication most people get that something has been failing for 15 years is a fall, and by then the process has already run most of its course. By the end of this, I am going to give you a three-part intervention I call the anchor protocol. Three specific components targeting three specific physiological systems, and I am going to explain exactly why most balance advice you have ever received has been addressing the wrong system entirely. But first, the number that should stop you cold. 36 million falls occur among adults 65 and older every single year in the United States. That figure comes directly from the Centers for Disease Control's surveillance data. 3 million of those people end up in emergency rooms. Around 300,000 fracture a hip. And here is the number that almost never makes it into a health article. Roughly 1 in 5 adults who suffers a hip fracture will be dead within 12 months. Not from the fracture itself, from the cascade that follows: pulmonary embolism, hospital-acquired pneumonia, cardiac stress during surgery, the metabolic spiral of sudden forced immobility in someone whose reserves were already marginal. The fall is the trigger. The biology underneath is the loaded gun. The total cost of fall-related injuries among older adults in the United States runs approximately $50 billion per year, according to the CDC. That is not a rounding error. That is roughly the entire annual budget of the National Institutes of Health. And the mechanism producing most of those falls is not bad luck, not inattention, and not simple old age. It is a specific, measurable, and in large part reversible biological failure that has been occurring silently for years. I want to walk you through exactly what that failure looks like, layer by layer, because understanding the mechanism is the only thing that makes the solution make sense. Think of your balance system as a three-legged stool. Each leg represents one sensory input channel. The first leg is your vestibular system, housed in the inner ear. The second leg is your proprioceptive system, your body's internal GPS, a network of sensors embedded in your muscles, tendons, and joint capsules. The third leg is your visual system. All three feed continuously into a processing center called the cerebellum, which integrates those signals in real time and issues corrections before you ever become consciously aware that your balance was being challenged. The stool does not need all three legs to be at equal strength to stay upright. But if one leg shortens significantly, the entire platform tilts. If two legs shorten simultaneously, the stool is barely functional. And if you then place unexpected weight on that compromised stool, a dark hallway, uneven pavement, carrying something, turning your head quickly while walking, it tips. That three-legged stool is the organizing principle of everything I am about to explain. The invisible villain at the center of this story is something called proprioceptive degradation. Proprioception is your body's internal positioning system. Without looking at your hand, you know exactly where it is in space. Without looking at your feet, you know whether your right foot is ahead of your left. This awareness is not mystical. It is the product of thousands of tiny sensors embedded throughout your muscles, tendons, and joint capsules, firing position and tension data upward to your spinal cord and brain 60 to 80 times per second. That system, the one you have almost certainly never thought about, begins to lose precision in your 40s. It accelerates its decline after 60. Research published in the journal Age and Aging found that ankle joint position sense, one of the most critical proprioceptive inputs for postural control, declines by roughly 40% between the ages of 20 and 80. 40% of your internal GPS signal gone. And not one of those losses announced itself. What makes proprioceptive degradation such a perfect invisible villain is its complete silence. It does not hurt. It does not cause fatigue you would notice. It does not show up on a blood panel. It is not screened at your annual physical. You do not feel the sensors going quiet. You feel fine. You feel fine right up until the moment you step off a curb at a slightly unexpected angle, or pivot quickly in a crowded room, or reach for something on an overhead shelf and find that your body has 10 milliseconds less correction time than it needed. That 10 milliseconds, that is the line between catching yourself and not. I want to take you deeper into each leg of the stool because each one has its own specific failure mechanism, and each one requires a different intervention. Lumping them together under the label of balance problems and responding with a generic stability class is precisely the error that keeps people on the trajectory toward a fall. The first leg, your vestibular system. The inner ear contains two small structures called the utricle and the saccule, plus three fluid-filled loops called the semicircular canals. The utricle and saccule are lined with hair cells, actual microscopic projections, embedded in a gel membrane weighted with tiny calcium crystals called otoliths, which translates from Greek as ear rocks. When your head tilts or moves in a straight line, those crystals shift under gravity, bending the hair cells, which fire a signal telling your brain you are tilting forward, you are decelerating, you are beginning to fall to the right. The semicircular canals handle rotational movement. Anytime you turn your head, the fluid inside those canals shifts, bends a different set of hair cells, and tells your brain exactly how fast and in which direction your head is rotating. This process is continuous, involuntary, and operating every moment you are awake. Now, here is what aging does to that system. Those hair cells cannot be regenerated in humans. You are born with a finite number of them, and once they are damaged or lost, they do not grow back. Histological studies, examinations of actual inner ear tissue from cadavers, published in the Journal of Vestibular Research and related literature, estimate that humans lose approximately 40% of their vestibular hair cell population by age 70. The raw signal your brain receives from the inner ear at 70 is dramatically less detailed, less precise, and slower to fire than the signal at 40. Your brain is navigating using a map where 40% of the data has been erased. But the mainstream conversation about vestibular aging almost always stops there, and it should not. Your brain has enormous compensatory capacity for vestibular loss, provided the other two legs of the stool are intact and well trained. The cerebellum, which I will come back to at length, is extraordinarily capable of upweighting a stronger sensory signal when a weaker one degrades. If your proprioception is sharp and your vision is stable and your brain has been trained to integrate those inputs effectively, the loss of vestibular hair cells is manageable. The crisis, the kind that produces a fall, almost always happens when all three systems are degrading simultaneously and the brain has no reliable signal left to wait. One compromised leg, then two, then the stool tips. The second leg is proprioception. And I want to be precise here because this is the leg that is most repairable and most consistently addressed by the wrong solutions. Every skeletal muscle in your body contains structures called muscle spindles, sensing organs wrapped around the muscle fibers themselves, monitoring both the length of the muscle and the rate at which it is changing. Your tendons contain Golgi tendon organs which monitor tension rather than length. Your joint capsules, the fibrous sleeves surrounding every movable joint, contain mechanoreceptors that fire based on compression, stretch, and angular position. Together, these three sensor types generate a continuous three-dimensional map of your body, updating dozens of times per second, entirely below conscious awareness. On a flat, well-lit, predictable surface, this system is barely challenged. Corrections are small, slow, and manageable even when the system is degraded. This is precisely why people with serious proprioceptive loss feel fine walking through their kitchen. The ground is known, the lighting is predictable, the cognitive demand is minimal. They compensate adequately. But add a single destabilizing variable, an unexpected slope, a glance over the shoulder, a bag that shifts weight off-center, a question that requires real thought, and the degraded system is suddenly being asked to perform at the edge of its capability. The stool has too much weight on a leg that is too short to hold it. The specific muscles most critical to this real-time proprioceptive correction are not the muscles most commonly trained. They are not the quadriceps, the glutes, or the core. all of which matter for force production and postural alignment, but which are positioned too far from the ground to serve as the primary real-time correctors. The primary correctors are in the lower leg, the tibialis anterior along the shin, the peroneal muscles along the outer lower leg, and above all, the soleus. The soleus is the deeper of the two calf muscles, lying beneath the more visible gastrocnemius. It is responsible for what biomechanists call the ankle strategy, the first-line, most energetically efficient mechanism your body uses to correct a small perturbation to balance. You begin to tilt forward, the soleus fires, generating a counterforce that pulls you back toward neutral. This is happening thousands of times per day without your awareness. The soleus is also exquisitely sensitive to the effects of prolonged sitting. You can maintain functional quadriceps and glutes through ordinary daily movement, walking, climbing stairs, while the soleus, which requires sustained low-load standing to maintain its tonic firing patterns, atrophies from disuse. A study published in Gait and Posture examining soleus response latency, the delay between a balance perturbation and the corrective muscle firing, found that this delay increases both with age and with physical inactivity. The differences measured were in the range of 10 to 20 milliseconds. That sounds inconsequential until you understand that the biomechanical window for catching a stumble before it becomes a fall is often under 200 milliseconds total. In that context, 20 milliseconds lost to a sluggish soleus is not trivial. It is potentially the entire margin. Here is the mainstream betrayal moment, and I say this not as an accusation, but as a straightforward observation about where the evidence points versus where the fitness industry has spent its attention. For the past 2 decades, the prevailing message delivered to older adults worried about balance has been, strengthen your core, do planks, get on a stability ball, work on your posture. Core strength matters for spinal alignment and injury prevention. I am not dismissing it, but it is not the rate-limiting factor in fall prevention for most adults over 55. It is not the leg of the stool that is going shortest. A 2019 meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, covering more than 40 randomized controlled trials and involving over 4,000 participants, examined the relative effectiveness of different exercise interventions on fall risk reduction in older adults. The finding was clear: task-specific balance training, exercises that directly challenge the ankle correction mechanism and load the proprioceptive system under progressively unstable conditions, produced significantly greater reductions in fall incidence than general strength training alone. Not marginally greater, clinically, statistically, meaningfully greater. The stool leg that needed lengthening was being ignored while everyone was focused on the chair seat. We have been told balance training means yoga or standing on a foam pad between warm-up sets. That framing, while not wrong, is incomplete in a way that has real consequences. The cerebellum, the balance processing center, only upgrades its circuitry when you present it with a challenge that genuinely approaches the edge of your stability. This is a process called adaptive plasticity. The cerebellum continuously compares predicted sensory input against actual sensory input, and when there is a mismatch, when the ground did something unexpected, when the correction required more than the model predicted, it updates its internal wiring to handle that situation better next time. But if the challenge never approaches your threshold, if you are always stable, always comfortable, always well within your competence, no adaptation occurs. The brain has no reason to rebuild a system it does not need. The third leg of the stool almost never comes up in balance discussions, and its absence from the conversation is a significant gap. Your visual system is not a backup to your vestibular and proprioceptive inputs. It is a co-primary input. Your brain continuously uses the visual field to confirm and cross-reference the signals arriving from the inner ear and the body's sensors. There is a specific mechanism called the vestibulo-ocular reflex, the automatic counter-rotation of your eyes to maintain a stable gaze image while your head is moving. When you turn your head left while walking, your eyes automatically rotate right by the same angle, holding a fixed point in focus. This reflex operates entirely below conscious awareness, functions at extremely high speed, and degrades in precision as vestibular hair cell loss advances. As vestibular input becomes less precise with age, the brain compensates by relying more heavily on vision to anchor postural stability. This works well in bright, visually rich environments with clear references for verticality and depth. It fails sharply in low light, in visually sparse environments like dark hallways, or in environments with visually competing patterns, busy tile floors, striped carpeting, cluttered retail spaces where movement is happening in multiple directions simultaneously. If you have ever felt an unexpected wave of unsteadiness in a large grocery store or a busy shopping mall, that is your visual stabilization system being overwhelmed. The vestibular signal is not strong enough to hold you independently, and the visual scene is too chaotic to serve as a reliable reference frame. Researchers call this phenomenon sensory unmasking. The degraded vestibular system is masked in everyday life by compensatory reliance on vision. Remove the visual support, turn off the light, close your eyes, enter a visually confusing space, and the true functional state of the balance system is exposed. This is also precisely why fall rates spike dramatically at night. It is not only about unseen obstacles. It is about removing the compensatory system that was concealing the underlying deficit. Clinically, the single-leg eyes-closed test is now considered one of the most revealing quick assessments of balance system integrity available without equipment. Most healthy adults in their 20s and 30s can maintain single-leg stance with eyes closed for 30 seconds or more without difficulty. Average performance in adults over 65 drops to under 10 seconds, and below 5 seconds is associated with significantly elevated fall risk in the research literature. If you want to know where your balance system actually stands right now, not where it seems to stand, but where it actually stands, close your eyes and lift one foot in a safe position near a wall. What you feel in those first few seconds is a much more honest assessment than anything you feel during normal walking. Now I want to spend real time on the cerebellum because this is where the story turns hopeful and also where it gets more mechanistically interesting than most health content is willing to go. The cerebellum is a compact, densely folded structure at the back base of the brain. It represents roughly 10% of the brain's total volume, but contains approximately 50% of all the brain's neurons. It receives sensory data from every system simultaneously, vestibular, proprioceptive, visual, motor command outputs, and integrates that data into a continuous, real-time model of body position and movement. It then issues correction signals so rapidly and automatically that conscious awareness is never involved. The critical distinction between a well-trained and a poorly trained cerebellum is whether it operates reactively or predictively. A reactive balance system responds after a perturbation has already reached a threatening angle. A predictive balance system anticipates perturbations based on learned models of how the body behaves in similar situations and begins the correction before the threat fully develops. This predictive function is built from experience, specifically from repeated exposure to variable, challenging balance situations that force the cerebellum to refine its internal models. Every time you navigate genuinely unpredictable terrain successfully, the cerebellum updates. Every time you walk exclusively on flat, smooth surfaces in cushioned shoes that reduce ground feedback, it has no new information to incorporate. The models stay static. Static models applied to a dynamic world produce errors. This is also why research examining balance function in older adults with lifelong histories of outdoor physical work, farming, fishing, working with hand tools on uneven ground, consistently finds substantially better postural stability than in age-matched adults whose lives were organized around desks, cars, and climate-controlled interiors. The biological hardware is the same, the training history is radically different. I want to talk about something else that gets almost no space in mainstream balance discussions: fear of falling. This sounds like a psychological issue sitting on top of a physical one. It is not. Fear of falling is a distinct physiological risk factor with its own feedback loop. Research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society and numerous subsequent studies have documented that after a fall, or even after a near fall, a stumble that frightened someone, a significant proportion of older adults begin restricting their activity. They walk less, they avoid stairs when possible, they stop going out in challenging weather, they reduce the physical variability in their movement, and in doing so, they accelerate the very proprioceptive and cerebellar degradation that made the fall likely in the first place. The stool legs shorten faster precisely because the person is protecting what they believe is an already compromised balance, not knowing that protection is the mechanism of further loss. One study from Duke University found that fear of falling was present in roughly 50% of community-dwelling older adults who had fallen at least once, and in approximately 25% of those who had not. That fear was associated with a significantly higher fall rate over the following year, independent of objective balance function. Meaning, the fear itself, through activity restriction and the deconditioning it causes, is predictive of subsequent falls beyond what the underlying balance deficit would predict alone. It is a self-fulfilling reduction. Once you understand that, you understand why interventions that only address physical training while ignoring the confidence component are working with one hand tied behind their back. There is another factor almost never discussed in balance conversations: vitamin D. Not as a general wellness supplement, but as a specific mechanism in the balance system. Vitamin D receptors are present in the vestibular nuclei, the brainstem structures that process vestibular input. They are also present in muscle tissue, where vitamin D plays a role in the maintenance of fast-twitch muscle fibers, particularly type 2 muscle fibers, which are the fast response fibers responsible for rapid postural corrections. A meta-analysis published in Osteoporosis International, covering data from more than 45,000 participants, found that vitamin D supplementation was associated with a meaningful reduction in fall risk in older adults, with the benefit concentrated specifically in individuals who were vitamin D deficient at baseline. The mechanism is not vague wellness enhancement. It is specific. Vitamin D deficiency degrades the speed of muscle response and may impair vestibular signal processing, both of which directly affect the latency of balance corrections. Roughly 42% of adults in the United States have insufficient vitamin D levels, according to data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. That is not a fringe deficiency, that is close to half the population. And because vitamin D deficiency causes no symptoms in its early stages, it is another layer of silent erosion that compounds the degradation already occurring in the vestibular and proprioceptive systems. I also need to address footwear because this one genuinely fascinates me in its absurdity. The modern athletic shoe, thick midsole, cushioned heel, high arch support, was designed to reduce impact and provide structural support during high-intensity activity. What it also does, as a biomechanical side effect, is dramatically reduce the quality of ground contact sensation reaching the foot's proprioceptors. The foot contains an extraordinary density of mechanoreceptors, particularly in the plantar surface, the sole, that are designed to transmit fine-grained information about surface texture, slope, compliance, and vibration directly to the balance system. A thick, cushioned sole filters much of that signal before it reaches the skin. You are functionally trying to read a map through oven mitts. Research comparing postural stability in subjects wearing minimalist footwear versus standard cushioned athletic shoes has found measurably better single-leg balance performance in the minimalist condition in healthy younger adults. In older adults, the transition needs to be gradual to avoid overloading the foot and ankle, but the directional finding matters. More ground contact information means better proprioceptive input, means more precise balance correction. Now let me address something that connects all of this to the real world in a way that matters practically: the dual task problem. In real life, balance almost never happens in isolation. You are not standing still in a quiet room with your full attention available. You are walking while talking, while carrying something, while thinking about the route, while turning to respond to someone behind you. Each of those parallel cognitive demands draws on a shared pool of processing resources. Research from the University of Illinois established a foundational principle in fall prevention science. When attention is split between a balance task and a cognitive task, balance performance degrades measurably. The more cognitively demanding the secondary task, the greater the impairment. In younger adults with fully calibrated balance systems, this dual task cost is small. Balance runs mostly on automatic. The cerebellum handles it without requiring conscious resources. In older adults with degraded sensors and a cerebellum running on incomplete models, balance increasingly requires conscious processing to maintain, which means it starts competing directly with cognitive tasks for limited attention bandwidth. Answering a question while descending stairs, trying to remember if you took your medication while walking across a parking lot, hearing your name called while navigating an unfamiliar supermarket layout. These are not moments of carelessness. These are moments where a degraded system hits its processing ceiling. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that a slowing of walking speed while simultaneously holding a conversation, known clinically as the stops walking when talking sign, was among the strongest individual predictors of future falls in community dwelling. Older adults outperforming multiple standard balance measures assessed in isolation. The real diagnostic question is not whether your balance holds up in a clinical room with someone watching. It is whether it holds up when real life happens around you at the same time. Now let me give you the anchor protocol in full. 3 components. Each one addresses a different leg of the three-legged stool. None of them require equipment you don't already have. The first anchor is vestibular reactivation. The goal is to present the inner ear and the vestibulo-ocular reflex with controlled, repeatable challenge that forces recalibration without overstimulating a degraded system. The specific exercise is called gaze stabilization training. You hold a target, a single letter written on a piece of paper or a small mark on a wall, at approximately arm's length. You keep your gaze fixed on that target while you move your head slowly side to side. Then repeat with up and down head movement. The pace should be approximately 1 full cycle, left and return to center, right and return to center, every 2 to 3 seconds. Faster than comfortable at first is less effective than slow and precise. 1 minute horizontal, 1 minute vertical. Every morning. The mechanism is direct. You are forcing the vestibulo-ocular reflex to fire repeatedly, with the eyes tracking a stationary point under head movement, which is the precise training stimulus needed to maintain precision in that reflex. Research from vestibular rehabilitation programs, including work published out of the Johns Hopkins Balance and Vestibular Center, and multiple randomized trials on vestibular hypofunction, has demonstrated measurable improvements in gaze stability and postural steadiness after 6 to 8 weeks of daily gaze stabilization practice in adults with documented vestibular degradation. 2 minutes per day, not negotiable in terms of simplicity. The critical mistake that invalidates this anchor, doing it seated. Training the vestibulo-ocular reflex while seated gives you a vestibular stimulus without a balance challenge. After 2 to 3 weeks of seated practice, progress to standing on a folded bath towel, which adds a mild proprioceptive challenge while performing the exercise. The cerebellum needs both systems challenged simultaneously to build integrated balance function rather than isolated vestibular precision. The second anchor is proprioceptive reloading. The target is the ankle complex, tibialis anterior, peroneals, and soleus, and the mechanism is progressive unstable surface loading that forces the ankle correction system to operate at increasing challenge levels. The progression works as follows. In the first week, stand on 1 foot on a firm surface, eyes open, for 30 seconds per side, 3 times per day. The goal is not comfort. The goal is to feel the ankle making continuous small adjustments. That sensation of micro-correction is the proprioceptive system activating. In the second week, shift to a folded bath towel under the standing foot. The compliant surface removes the stable ground reference and forces the mechanoreceptors in the ankle to work harder to generate accurate position data. In the third week, add eyes closed for the final 10 to 15 seconds of each 30-second hold. Removing visual input forces the vestibular and proprioceptive systems to perform without their compensatory visual anchor. The Otago Exercise Program, developed at the University of Otago in New Zealand and studied in multiple independent randomized controlled trials, uses progressive single-leg balance training as a core component and has consistently demonstrated a 35% reduction in falls among older adults who complete the full protocol. 35% is not a marginal finding. That is a clinically significant shift in individual risk from a home-based protocol requiring no equipment and under 10 minutes per day. The mistake that completely invalidates this anchor, gripping a support surface throughout the exercise. A light fingertip touch on a wall is acceptable if genuine safety requires it, provided you are not actually leaning. Gripping the counter with a full hand transfers the balance load to the arms and removes the ankle strategy from the training equation entirely. You are practicing the visual performance of balance without loading the physiological mechanism of balance. The ankle proprioceptors are not being challenged. No adaptation occurs. The third anchor is dual task integration. This is the component most absent from standard balance advice and potentially the most important for real-world transfer. The goal is to rebuild automatic processing in the cerebellum, to train it to manage balance without requiring conscious attention, so that when daily life places real cognitive demands on you, the balance system does not have to compete for resources. The mechanism is called overlearning through simultaneous load. By repeatedly practicing balance challenges while simultaneously engaging real cognitive tasks, you push the balance function back below the threshold of conscious attention, where it belongs. The exercise: perform single-leg stance on your foam pad or folded towel while simultaneously counting backward from 100 by sevens, or naming every country you can think of, or reciting the words to a song. The cognitive task must be genuinely demanding, not perfunctory. If it feels easy, it is not generating the dual task stress that forces the cerebellum to reorganize its resource allocation. Research from the University of Illinois and multiple subsequent studies on combined cognitive balance training in older adults found that this dual task approach produced significantly greater transfer to real-world fall reduction than balance training performed in quiet, undistracted conditions. The explanation is neurologically straightforward. You need to train the system under the conditions that match where it will actually be tested. Frequency for all three anchors, 5 days per week, with sessions lasting between 8 and 12 minutes total. The cerebellum adapts at the level of structural rewiring, not just chemical signaling, which means changes accumulate over weeks rather than days. Research on cerebellar adaptation timelines generally shows measurable functional improvement beginning around 6 weeks of consistent training. Consistency matters more than session intensity. Outside of the anchor protocol, the single most impactful habit change I can give you is this. Take 10 to 15 minutes of every walk you take off of flat, paved surfaces. Walk on grass. Find a park path with tree roots and gentle slopes. Walk on gravel or sand. Your cerebellum is not looking for a workout. It is looking for information it has not seen before. Flat concrete gives it nothing new. Variable ground gives it a continuous stream of small, manageable surprises that keep the internal models current and the correction systems sharp. This is what your balance hardware was designed to process. Every flat surface you choose over a varied one is a small withdrawal from the account. 36 million falls per year. $50 billion in annual healthcare costs. A 35% reduction in falls achievable with 8 to 12 minutes per day of targeted exercise. I genuinely find the gap between those numbers funny in the way I find a lot of things in the health system funny. Not enraging, not conspiratorial, just quietly, absurdly preventable. The information exists, the mechanism is understood, the protocol is free. And most of the people who need it most are walking their flat roots in cushioned shoes, feeling fine, trusting that fine means safe. It does not always mean safe. And now you know why. If you are going to start the anchor protocol this week, gaze stabilization, proprioceptive reloading, dual task integration, comment anchored below so I can see who is actually doing this. And subscribe, because the next video goes directly into the vestibular system alone, the specific head movements, the neurological mechanism of dizziness on standing, and why most doctors are still missing it.